Hello, thank you for taking the time to view the configuration of Binary Trees Migration Product CMT for Google Apps. The first step in the configuration is to configure our settings. On the Domino settings page, we must configure the general settings, the mail server, the server name and address book, and the server mailbox. The next section in the Domino settings is referring to email replyability. We have the ability to strip Domino domain names from the email addresses. Therefore, it will result in a valid and replyable address regardless of domain changes over the years. The next section is referring to when you audit your users what type of settings you would like to use. We have the ability to audit encrypted items. We also have the ability to audit mail rules. When you're notifying your users to perform some sort of action, there's a couple different notification settings. You can send them individual notifications or combined notifications of all the different message templates that we will go over. Lastly, you can enable the CMT for Google Apps product to become a mail-in database. This will allow your end users, when they click on message templates and perform such actions, to actually mail back to this database and notify you of those changes. On the additional settings, for the migration engine, we have the ability to configure the product as a migration server and set the program directory of where it is installed. When you import users from the Domino server name and address book, you have the ability to select the view for which you'd like to import your users. By default, it is set to people. And lastly, you want to configure your Google options. You need to configure your Google mail domain that will be used for the migration destination, as well as the password that will have access to the mail files for the migration. The next step under configuration is referring to migration profiles. Migration profiles are your settings that you're going to be configuring during a migration. We have the ability to configure source options and destination options. On the source options, you have the ability to select all message types to be migrated, or you can use just a subset of settings of message types to be migrated, such as mail, calendar, tasks, or contacts. You also have the ability to choose if you would like to select a date filter during a migration, only migrating message types of a certain date range. You have the ability to select a minimal or verbose logging level. You can skip specific folders during a migration. For example, you just put their mail file name in here you would like skipped, and it will not be migrated. You have the ability to keep the processing window open. By default, it is set to no, and the ability to migrate sent messages. And on the destination options, where you would like your logs stored during the migration, by default we just configure a CMT Google directory, as well as if you'd like to label the inbox, so if you'd like to carry the inbox label to the Google mailbox. When you configure a migration profile, you have the ability to name it anything you would like. We will just call it Demo. And we'll hit OK, and we'll save these settings. If we click refresh, you can see that the profile is created. You can create multiple profiles during a migration. Therefore, when you're actually performing a migration, you can select a profile to be migrated on a specific user or a group of users. The third step in the configuration is referring to email replyability. We need to create an address translation table to make sure that all the different combinations of a Domino name are mapped to a universally recognized SMTP address. Therefore, we click on Add Names to Translation Table. I will say Add All Names to Translation Table. This will import everybody from my Domino server name and address book into the CMT for Google product. As you can see, that many of the Domino names are now mapped to SMTP addresses. So, for example, if we look at Whoopi in this environment, she has many different combinations of her notes name, and during the migration now, it will be mapped to the universally recognized SMTP address, and that is again to ensure that all emails are fully replyable after migration. After you create the address translation table, we need to save the translation table, and this saves the translation table to a backend database that we refer to during the migration. So we will just wait for it to save here, and it will let you know that it successfully saved it off. Lastly, the last part in configuration is message template, step number 4. There's nothing to configure here, but you should be aware of the several different message templates or emails that we have available to send to your end users. We have the ability to send your end users an email to synchronize their contacts from their local name and address book into their server mail file. Therefore, we have access to them during migration. We also have a template or an email to decrypt encrypted items prior to a migration to ensure that all messages are completely migrated. That concludes the configuration step of CMT for Google Apps.